All right. So this is Patrick's, and if we take a look on the surface part of it, the skin's actually done pretty well. He actually managed to, sort of like smooth things out. But the issue that I have with this is that if you take a look at the before and after, so I'm going to go down and show you the very, very before part and the after part, you can see that there's natural highlights that are actually happening on this girl's face. So you'll see it right here in the area that where he smoothed out all the skin. You'll also see it on the bridge of the nose, that kind of stuff here. You can pick it up in other places. In his case right here, though, in smoothing all of that out, he's really lost that highlight, and you need to keep the natural highlights, not the small little ones that are showing all the pores, but the big general area of it. So it's something to sort of try to figure out. I'm going to show you what his total small layer stuff looks like. So this is the first clue about what's really happening in here. And you can see that in the dodging and burning, I mean, he's done this remarkable job of this. I have no idea how. Now I know why you keep asking me how long something's going to take, because my guess is this took you forever.
6 hours.
Yeah, exactly, right? So it's one of the few assignments that actually is that demanding. So, but at any rate, but when you take a look at this, you can see that just in just a cursory glance of this, you see it's really more dominated by burning than it is by dodging. All right, so there's a lot more darkness in here than lightness, and what that means is that it's actually pushing. So it's doing the corrective work. It's smoothing out the skin. There's no question that he did that. But then it's also really stepping on the natural highlight that's on here. So typically what you would be looking for here is something that was a little bit more even in terms of the dodging and burning. So you're really sort of lifting those darker areas and pushing down the lighter areas to get somewhere in between. But anyway, it's tricky, but it's not saying that you can't fix it afterwards. So I'm going to show you how to do that in just 1 second. So I'm going to turn everybody back on. Then we take a look at his tonal large layer. If you bring this on and off, you can see that this is actually restoring some of those natural highlights. And so this is one of the things that's the hardest to understand about what's really going on with the tonal large work. So again, when Patrick did this, he went in and he did exactly sort of like what I think was possibly implied by all of this. He used this layer to actually press down the highlights in here and to lift some of the shadows so that the skin balanced out. The thing is that you're not trying to balance out the highlights and the shadows of the skin. You're trying to balance out, you're using this layer to balance out the blotchiness of the skin. And so what I mean by the blotchiness of the skin is exactly this. It's the darkness on her upper lip right here. You're just trying to smooth that part out. So you can see in his case, there's a little bit of movement in there, not too much movement in here. There's another dark area right here that I would be lifting. But in terms of the overall highlights and shadow parts in here, you don't want to actually kill those parts because then her face just becomes completely flat. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on? All right, so that being said, he spent 6 hours doing this. This is also the other reason that I'm asking you guys to keep your tonal large, which is what we're looking at right here, separate from your tonal small, because his tonal small right here, this is so involved. If you ended up doing the large tonal retouching on this very same layer, it's possible you could do it, but if you do it and you fuck something up, then you have to undo all of this really super detailed work. That's the stuff that takes 6 hours to do. The stuff doing the really tonal stuff around the whole face, whatever, you knock that out in 15 minutes, but this takes forever. So this is why we want to keep it on separate layers. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on? It's just that way they both do the same thing on 2 different layers as they would on a single, but that way if you mess something up, you do not have to redo all your super detail-y kind of work here. So going back here, one last thing that I want to talk about really quickly. If you take a look right here, anybody spot anything wrong with this? Say what? Yeah, the brush is too hard. It does its job, believe me, because the stuff that he's doing here is very subtle. So I don't know that you would really necessarily pick up on the edges, but there's no reason to run that risk. So again, I would smooth those edges out in there just to make sure. But anyway, I'm going to go back here to the very beginning, and I'm going to show you how I would quickly fix this as opposed to having to go back in and change everything. I'm simply going to add another tonal layer on the very top. I'm going to do it underneath his teeth whitening, because his teeth whitening, he's got this It's looking like this is a pixel layer. This is not done tonally. I would suggest, again, that you do this tonally as opposed to doing this with pixel layer, but that doesn't mean that doing it with a pixel layer is wrong. It's like everything in Photoshop. There's a million ways to do it. But I'm going to simply add another tonal retouching layer on top of this. So again, I'm going to hold down my Option key, click on Add Layer, and I'm going to do another tonal large. Tonal retouch, and we'll call it contouring. So now we're not going to be fixing problems. Now we're just going to be building more dimension into her face. So the thing to think about when you're doing contouring is that the things in an image that are heading towards the camera tend to be lighter than the things that are receding from the camera. So that gives us a clue about where we need to lighten and darken elements on this girl's face. So the first thing I'm going to do, though, is actually make my dodging and burning color. So I'm going to click on the foreground color, click on this to actually select a color. I know it's just giving me a color of hue. I'm going to click on the brightness. So again, I'm making in this case, I'm going to make a dodging color in here. So I'm going to lift this up until roughly in the mid 90s. I'm going to click on my saturation and drop it down, not all the way down, because if you go all the way down here, this is a light gray, and that will actually stain your image. It'll desaturate the area where you're working. So you want to make sure you're keeping a little color in there. So that's going to be my dodging color right there. And then I'm going to click and I'll make a burning color as well. So again, I'll click on the same sort of color here, grab my brightness, drag it down sort of into the lower teens, click on my saturation, and push it up a little bit so that I keep a little bit of color in there and say okay with that. So I'm going to work with my dodging color first. I'm going to hit the brush, the B key, make sure that it's a completely soft brush. Mine is. I'm going to actually keep my opacity. It's a normal blending mode. I'm going to keep the opacity at 100, but I'm going to drop my flow to around 3-4%, somewhere in there. This may be even a little bit too aggressive. Sometimes I'll change this down even to like a 1 or a 2. Don't be scared to go down that low in here. I'm going to make my brush now smaller so that it's really more the bridge, the top part of her nose. And I'm just going to start, I'm working on a tablet, I'm just going to start pushing it back and forth to actually give me some tone in there. Now, in my sense, I feel like this part sort of worked. I feel like it happened all way too fast, though. So again, I'm going to go back to my new layer in history. I'm going to drop that flow all the way down to 1%, and I'm going to do the same thing again. And now I've actually got a little bit more control over it. So this is actually the beginning of it for me, and you can see that on this new tonal layer that I'm doing right here, I did not make this, I did not fill this with 50% gray, so this is the other thing I wanted to show you guys really quickly. I'm going to hold down the Option key and click on this, and it's impossible to see. I mean, it's there, but it's really impossible to see where my retouching is on this. So I'm going to fill this layer now with 50% gray, which will remove all of that retouching. So now you can actually see, I'm going to turn everybody else back on. Hang on 1 second. Make sure that this is a soft light layer. So now I'm going to do the very same trick again on this, but it's now got that 50% fill in it, still using my dodging color in here, and just to work myself back and forth here a little bit. Yeah, now because I've got this fill that's actually happening in here, it's much more subtle, but also if I take a look at it by itself, you can spot where the retouching is easily. Exactly. Because if it doesn't have the fill, if it's completely transparent, you still get the same thing. All right. Okay, so I'm going to leave this at this. I'm going to make my brush larger. Sorry. And I'm going to lighten up this area where the natural highlight would fall on her cheek up in here. So I'm just scrubbing around here. And again, I'll do this on and off here to make sure that it's actually doing what I want. And I'll do another one on the other cheek over in here. And so this is what I'm beginning to do here. You can see as I turn this on and off, I'm going to zip back out just a little bit. So what I'm doing is that I'm giving her face dimension. You can see that now this, instead of being a completely flat surface in here, This is actually now coming slightly forward. It's a little bit rounder, and then as I get into the darker area here, you can see it begins to recede on her face. I can hit my X key to actually push my color to get to my burning color now, make my brush a little bit larger here, and I can actually darken up some of the side areas in here right now on this as well. And so now you can see that's what's happening here. So it's beginning to bring more dimension back into her face, which is a very different thing than smoothing out the blotchiness of the skin. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on here? Are we good on this part? All right.
So that's less speed, right? Just like the nose bridge, inside cheek.
Yep,
So
that's the recipe.
Yeah, so we can do all the like large tonal retouching based on that.
Pretty much. No, the large tonal retouching part. So what's going on with that, I'm going to turn off all of your large work, and I will show you what I really mean by this. So doing the large work, if I was going to be doing this, I don't think you have anything on this layer, so let me make sure. No, you do have something on there, so I'm going to make actually another one. And change its blending mode to soft light. Go ahead and fill this with a neutral color, say okay. Make my brush smaller now, so X key to actually get my dodging color in here. So I'm going to start off with this area right in here where I feel like that there's something just in here. It just needs to be blended out. So I'm just going to run my way along here and then just stop at that and turn this guy on and off. And you can see that small little dark spot there just got lifted. I can now start to actually make my brush a little bit smaller, start to do the same thing on her upper lip, this area that's right over in here. So again, if we now take a look at this, you can see again, I'm just smoothing out those skin tones here. I've got another sort of dark shadow that's happening under here, so I'm going to start to work my way along this part as well. And again, I'm just trying to blend things out so that I don't see these distinct areas of darkness or lightness. So that's taking care of both of those guys. I'm going to look up here again. Obviously the area that's right under the eyes. Don't push this completely out, because if you do, she loses all the shape of her eyes. But I'll actually lift those a little bit, lift this a little bit more. So again, you can sort of see so that's what tonal retouching large is all about, which is a very different thing than doing the contouring. We good on this part? Great. Can you show me something? Thanks. Oh, sorry. Okay, but all in all, it's just like I said to you in the comments, whatever, I thought it was really well done. Yeah, I mean, it just, again, for your all's first foray into doing this stuff, whatever, I thought it was actually extremely well done. Speaking of well done, though, there is two that I want to show you really quickly. So this is M's right here. It's maybe not quite as far as I would take it, a little bit. People I ask all the time, how smooth do you make the skin? How far do you push this? My suggestion is that you push this as far as the only way you know that you've gone too far is to go too far. So my suggestion is that you go too far, and then you can use a layer mask to actually bring it back. And so what I mean by that is that I don't believe that this is too far, but nonetheless, if I was feeling this way about it, what I would do to actually give myself to be able to step backwards without having to undo all of the retouching that's actually in here is if you select your very top layer in this, hold down Command, Option, Shift, and the letter E. Again, it's that same merge stamp version that we've talked about doing over and over and over again. Then I'm going to turn off all the layers that are in between my background layer, the original, and this top layer. So now with this top layer, if you turn the eyeball on and off, you can see it removes all of the retouching. So all of the retouching now has been merged into this one single layer. All the tonal work is in here, all the pixel work is in here, everything is in this layer. I've turned everything off so that when I turn this guy off, it just shows the unretouched background layer. So then I'm going to put an opaque layer mask on this guy. So I'm holding down the Option key and click, and it adds a black mask which hides everything. And then I'm actually going to still stay with the normal brush. I'm going to bump my flow up to around a 100% opacity. And then I can actually start to come in here. I'm going to make it a larger brush. I can start coming in here. You'll see that even though I had my foreground and background colors set to do tonal retouching, when I go to my layer mask right here, my foreground and background colors automatically change to black and white. And the reason they do that is because you cannot have color in a layer mask. If I click on my pixel content right here, you can see that I do have my dodging and burning colors in here. So because you can have color in a pixel content but not in a layer mask. So I don't need to worry about changing those or resetting them or anything else like that. So this is now white, so I'm going to be painting white on a black mask to actually start to reveal stuff. And so then I can come in here and I can just start to work my way around on her skin. I can start to work my way down here, and you'll see it's slowly bringing those areas of retouching in, or actually showing them. So this is a way to actually play. If you feel like you've gone too far, this is what my layer mask now looks like. That's what I'm doing. So if you feel like you've gone too far, hit the X key and you can start to pull some of this back. So if you feel like this is a better skin tone, I've just pulled it back without having to go in and mask my tonal layers or mask anything else. Is this sort of making sense to everybody, kind of what's going on here? Okay, so that's how I would do that part. But anyway, I just thought overall I wanted to show you that one. I thought it was extremely well done. Couple of others to show really fast, and then we'll move on. So I want to show you Pablo's really quick. Oh, great, thanks. So in Pablo's, what happened is that I'm going to show you one that even gets a little bit worse right here, but I'm going to turn off, I think it's in the pixel retouching layer, so I'm going to do the pixel retouching layer on and off. It is. And what I want to show you is this. If you take a look at the sort of little corner of her eye right here, that's the corner of her eye that's actually got a set of catch lights that are in the very corner, this part right here. He took them out, and when he did, you end up you end up removing the moisture from somebody's eyes when you do that, and it makes them look dead. So if you want your people to look dead, start doing that kind of stuff. Start to remove the moisture from their eyes, the moisture from their lips and their teeth and that kind of stuff. But anyway, I just wanted to point that part out. Typically, it's not the part that you want to be taking out. So again, this tonal retouch layer worked well for him to actually remove the little dots on here that you couldn't do tonally, but going after the catch lights in the eyes actually were probably not anyone's best move in that. Also, if we take a look at the teeth here, I want to show you what's going on here with this guy. This one's really pretty important. So this is, it looks like he did this doing a tonal retouching, but again, if I hold down my option key and click on it, I almost can't see this. Had this been on, but it's also, this is not done as a soft light layer. This is not a dodge and burn because it's a normal blending mode in here. But regardless, what's happened here, if I turn this on and off, as you can see, he's actually lifted the shadow that's happening right here. If you take a look at the original teeth, so this is the original teeth we're looking at, you can see that there's a shadow on the very top of the teeth, and then there's a highlight that's actually happening along the bottom. And the reason that exists is that her lips are actually throwing a shadow on the top part of her teeth. So the bottom part of her teeth are open to the light, so the light's actually seeing it. But her mouth itself, her lips itself, this top lip itself, is what's casting a shadow on the very top of her teeth. When you remove that by actually clicking this like this, it pulls her teeth out of her mouth, and her teeth now become level with the front of her lip because there's no longer that shadow. You need to keep that shadow. So when you go to lift this tone right here, you actually can lift the whole thing tonally. The bottom, because it's already lighter, will lift. As long as you're doing it the same amount, it will lift and still keep some sense of shadow on the top, which keeps her teeth in her mouth as opposed to having her teeth flush with the front of her lip. Does that make sense, everybody? Questions about this? Okay. I'm going to show you something a little bit creepier. So this is Linea's right here, and You can see in her case, she actually removed the catch lights from the eyes, which I think is it's kind of an interesting look, a little bit creepy, but again, you can see that it really deadens the person completely in here. And I think this also might be on her pixel layer, so their pixel layer. So let me find out. Yeah. So it's right here. And you can just see the impact that this ultimately has, because again, it removes the moisture in her eye, because the moisture is what's actually causing that reflection of that highlight. That's what shows the catch lights. So when you remove the catch lights, you also remove the moisture in her eye. So I just wanted to throw that part out there. And then finally, one last one. So Liam's has actually made it to the Hall of Fame. I keep a bunch of these that as time has gone on, but this was extremely well done. And if you take a look at this, the skin is still skin. It's really beautiful, soft and glowy. If we take a look through the stack, he did a little bit of liquefying at the end, which is fine. We're actually going to get into liquefying today, but just to give you some rough idea of what's going on, this would be his contouring right here. So you can see he's actually pushing more of the front planes of the face a little bit more forward and the side planes a little bit further back, just like we were talking about. This is his tonal retouching layer, just in an overall, it seems like a little bit more targeted for it. And then if we hold down the option key and take a look, this is what his retouching looks like. So Liam, the only thing I would say is that this gets a little mushed up in all of this, but again, the overall effect part of it worked out really well. So I can't really complain about any of that part. So at any rate, I just thought this was extremely well done, because it gets the job done. It actually, without really doing a lot of damage to the texture of the skin from a pixel point of view, it keeps all the texture of the skin, but the skin just looks flawless. So anyway, well done. Questions about any of this, about doing tonal retouching, how we set it up, all the above? Are we kind of good on all of this? So again, I keep stressing this. I'm going to stress this again. For those of you who are not doing fashion and beauty work, do not look at this and say, well, okay, that's exclusive to doing fashion and beauty. That's just exclusive to skin. This is not exclusive to skin. This is how you balance out the patch of grass that's too dark in the lawn. This is how you balance out the stain in the concrete. This is how you balance out the part of the roof that's actually older than the other part of the roof. This is how you do. And I've got to be honest with you. So a lot of times if you have color that's slightly off, but it's really not that the color is different, it's really more has to do with the luminosity, the brightness of it. You'll find that doing this work is more subtle, and you get there and it's more successful, and you get there faster than actually trying to do this using curves to change the color and to do all of that kind of stuff. Make sense? We good on this? Okay. All right, that's that. Okay, a couple of other things that I want to get to first. How many people in here are shooting film? Anyone? No, film is finally dead to everyone. God, that's so sad. Oh, you're absolutely right. I was just having this conversation with Ross the other day. Just how expensive it's gotten to be, especially if you do chrome film, transparency film, which is the only thing I ever shot. I'm stunned at how expensive it is to get that stuff processed now. And the fact, I don't know that there's anyone in Chicago who can do it or will do it. But most people now are sending shit away, and so it costs a fortune, and you have to FedEx it out, and you don't get it back for 3 or 4 days. And yeah, I can understand where that's going. However, I think that this will actually illustrate something that, again, is not exclusive to people who shoot film. So anyway, that's just how I'm going to approach this. So we'll take it from there. I'm going to close this guy up, but I do need you guys. 2 things. We are going to be working with a tablet today, so if you have yours, it would be great to go ahead and get it going. If you don't have it, it's not going to be the end of the world. It's not as critical as it is doing the tonal retouching part. Anybody try to do the tonal retouching part with the mouse? You're kidding. Oh my God. How's your hand? Oh, okay. Right. Yeah. So wait, is it because your pinky was sitting off the edge of the tablet, or? Yeah, so that's why I actually changed the mapping of mine so that my hand rests more in the center. Oh, all right. Well, maybe it's not enough. Maybe your hand's bigger than mine. You know what they say about big hands? Big gloves. Oh, yeah, that was. Okay. So I think this is going to be in session 9. I sure hope this is in session 9. Nope, it's not going to be in session 9. It's going to be in session 8. Yeah, so for you guys, session 8, open this if you can, even though I think this is session 9 today. Is this the 9th week or the 8th week? This is the 8th week? Oh, thank God. I've got this right. Okay, fine. So in week 8, there's a file called dust removal. If you can open that guy up for me, that's just where we'll start. So was everybody able to find this guy? Anybody not? Okay, so this is actually a piece of film that has been scanned. And if you zoom into the top left-hand corner, you'll see exactly what the problem is when you try to scan film. So there's a lot of dust in here. There's a scratch in the film. If you take a look around the whole image, there's the same thing going on. There's dust on her. There's scratches that go right down through the middle of his chest, all this kind of stuff. So the way most people would go after this thing is that they would simply go in with a healing brush or a clone stamp tool, and they would clone all of this out, and it takes forever. So I'm going to try to show you a shortcut that I would use that I think is really effective, and so that's basically the way I'm going to approach this. So our first move is to make a duplicate of the background layer. So make sure the background layer is selected, hit Command J, it'll make a copy of it. I'm going to double click on it and call this Pixel Retouch. And say OK to that. And then I'm actually going to go up to the filter menu, down to noise, down to dust and scratches. So with the dust and scratches dialog box will open up, and you'll see that there, did we find that? Okay, there's two controls. There's a radius control at the top and a threshold. I want you to zero the threshold out by dragging its little slider all the way to the left. And then, yeah. Are we good? Okay. Also drag the radius all the way to the left. It does not go to 0, it goes to 1. So what this filter does is it's actually looking at the dust and scratches. Well, it's looking at all the pixels on your image. But what it's trying to do is it's trying to make a distinction between areas that would be considered dust and areas that would be considered background. So you can see, like here in this little area right in here, that those are clearly dust areas. Those particles of dust have a width to them or a height to them. I mean, they have dimension. What radius is about is you're making the radius large enough to cover that hunk of dust. So if we actually have the radius set at 1 and the threshold at 0, I'll talk about what threshold is in just a second, and you use your up arrow key, it will actually step you up to the whole integers. So if you hit the up key once, your radius goes to 2, and then you simply take a look at the image, and I can still see the scratch that's right here, and I can still see a lot of those small little dusts here. So it's not high enough radius, so I'm going to hit the up arrow key again. Now I've got a pixel radius of 3. I can still spot the scratch, and I can still spot some of the other dust particles in here. So I'm going to hit it one more time to go to 4. At 4, I've begun to almost entirely lose the scratch right there. My screen is filthy. So I'm just going to tell you this. There's a lot of shit that's on my screen that I don't know if it's dust or not. So the way to figure it out is just click on your image and move it around. And the stuff that doesn't move is your screen. And the stuff that does move is the dust in your image. So I know that that little spot right up there is actually dust still. I'm going to try hitting this one more time and go to a radius of 5. And then I'm going to move this around again. And yeah, I feel like that has given me all of the dust removal part that I want in here. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK to this. At this stage of the game, if you take a look at your image, it's been blurred to shit. But this gives us the things that we need to actually make dust removal easy. So at this stage of the game, over at your history palette, I'm going to do a snapshot of this history state. So click on the camera that's on the very bottom. Let me move this guy back so you can see it. Click on the camera that's at the very bottom of your history palette. A dialog box should open up. We've gone through this every time we've gone to the history box here, right over. Did everybody get this new snapshot dialog box to open up? Okay, if you didn't, it's because you don't have it set in your history options. You don't have these things set. So again, that's no show new snapshot dialog by default. You want that enabled, and you also want the automatically create new snapshot when saving. If you got those done, then when you click on the camera, it will allow you to name this thing, and we're going to call it Dust and Scratch. Oh, thank you. Yeah, good. Can't wait. Okay, I'm going to call this Dust and Scratch, and I'm going to say okay. So now we've actually got a history state up at the top that's called Dust and Scratch, but we've also got this Dust and Scratch that we actually did on the image down here below. I'm going to go back one step in history, back to where it was the name change. So now this has brought all of my dust and scratches are back, but I have a history state that allows me to paint with what the image looked like when we had run the dust and scratch filter. But it gets better than this because it gives me even more control, because it doesn't help me just to be able to go back to the history state. I want to be much more discriminatory about it. I want to be much more discreet in how I actually use this tool. So I'm going to come up to my history palette. You do not want to select the dust and history scratch state. You simply want to click on the very left-hand side of that state to put the history icon brush next to the dust and scratch state. Now, I have not picked this state because if I did, all of this shit would be gone. I have not picked this state. What I've actually done is simply said, I want to, when I use the history brush, I want this to actually paint with what the image looked like when I had run that dust and scratch filter. So then I'm going to go to my history brush. So to get to the history brush, it's right underneath the clone stamp tool. You'll go to flyout menu, make sure that you are doing the history brush, not the art history brush right below it. But this is where the magic of all of this comes in. You can use blending modes for this. So I don't want to keep my history brush as a normal blending mode here. If you take a look at the dust that's on this white background right here, all of it is darker than the background. So what I want my history brush to do is strictly lighten. Because if I say, okay, I want this to lighten and I paint it across this scratch that's right here, all of the area that's on both sides that already was lighter is actually already gone. I mean, there's no change. It doesn't need to be changed. So the only thing that will be impacted will be the scratch. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay. And now that I've done all of that, I've realized that I didn't go all the way through the dust and scratch state. So I need everybody, we're going to redo this. Come over and grab your dust and scratch state right here and throw it away. We are going to do this again. I'm going to go back down in history to name change. And then again, working on this pixel retouch layer, I'm going to run that dust and scratch filter again. So up to the menu, do not use dust and scratch up at the very top because that will just apply the settings that we did before. And I realized I didn't do any threshold setting before and we need to do that. So I'm going to come down to noise again, down to dust and scratch. It's a sticky thing, so it's going to leave 5 pixels in here. What threshold is about, which we didn't get to, and so that's why I'm back at this place right now. What threshold is that it's you are telling Photoshop how much difference in tone does the dust have to be from the background in order for it to be considered dust. So you can see if we take a look here, if you grab your threshold and drag it all the way up, I'm going to grab it all the way up to like in the 40s, whatever, it brings back all the dust and scratches in here, because the dust and scratches are not more than 47 tones different in tone than the background. So the trick about doing this, especially if you're doing film, is as you start to, what we want to do now is the radius is set at 5 and the radius is fine. We now want to start lifting the threshold as much as we possibly can, but not too much to bring back the dust and scratches that we're trying to get rid of. In most cases, what this does is in film, this restores the grain of the film. So what we're looking for is to try to hit that sweet spot where we remove all the dust, but we actually use threshold to then return the film grain to our image. So at any rate, I'm going to do the same thing with threshold. I'm going to just tap it. It's selected right now at 0. I'm going to tap my up arrow and it goes to 1. I still haven't, my dust isn't back. I'm going to go to 2. My dust still is not back. I'm going to go to 3. My dust is still not back. I'm going to go to 4. My dust is still not back. I'm going to go to 5, and I'm beginning to see a little something in here. But again, I got to start moving this guy right here. So I'm not seeing anything yet. I'm going to hit a 6 on here, a 7 on here. Start to move this around. I'm sort of faintly beginning to pick up that scratch again. I'm going to try an 8 on here. Yeah, the 8 on here, I can see the scratch is actually beginning to come back into this. So I'm going to go back down to a 6, and I'm going to say OK. And then I'm going to come back over to my history palette, click on the little camera to do a snapshot, call it Dust and Scratch. And say OK. Go back in history states one step to undo the dust and scratch. But before we do that, take a look at this. If we go back and forth, I'm going to zip back out. Take a look at what this dust and scratch actually does to the figures. I mean, it's a softening filter. So anyway, that's why I can't use it on the entire image. So anyway, I'm going to go back one step here. I'm also going to click on the little box on the left side of that dust and scratch state so that my history brush will actually use that state when we work with it. Then I'm going to grab the history brush. Again, we've already done that. Then I'm going to check my history brush. I'm going to keep it as a completely soft brush. In my mode, though, again, with this part in this area that's over in here, I only want to lighten stuff. So again, the way dust works is that if you've got a piece of dust on a light background, the dust shows up as dark. We're going to talk about what happens if you get to a dark background in a second. But at any rate, so in this case, I only need to lighten, so I'm going to click on my drop-down menu, and I'm simply going to say I want to lighten this image. Then I'm going to keep my opacity at 100%, my flow at 100%. I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller, and now I'm simply going to run down that line and get rid of that entire scratch. Also, you can actually hit any of the small little dust particles that are in here. You can actually you don't have to sample anything. This isn't like the clone stamp tool. You can just run all of this stuff around and it works great. So that's the first way of doing it. If you've done all of that, I want you to go back in history to undo all of your history brush states. So I'm going to go back again to name change. I'm just bringing back all the dust because I'm showing you multiple ways of doing it. So the next way we can actually do this, we can do it on a much larger scale because this still means you've got to paint on everything. To get this to a larger scale, I'm going to hit the L key to get the lasso tool, and I'm going to select this whole big area of beach. Stay away from the guy, stay away from the girl. I'm just going to do this whole big area of the beach corner that's in the back. So I've got the marching ants that are actually back here. Then I'm going to go up to the edit menu, and I'm going to come down and do fill. And in the fill drop down box, I'm going to click on this drop down and say, I want you to fill this with history, but you've also got blending modes here. And I'm going to say in my drop down blending mode, I only want this stuff to be lightened, and then say OK. And it gets rid of everything in a wholesale way. Now, you guys know how to select a lot of things now, not just using these hand tools like this. You could make a selection of the entire beach based on luminosity. And then again, once you got the selection going, just you run this brush, fill it, and you're good to go. Yes? I'm sorry, you what? So selection up to the edit menu, down to fill, And in the dialog box that opens up, use the drop down menu to say you want to fill this selection with history, and then set the blending mode to lighten. You leave the opacity at 100% and just say OK. And it gets rid of all of that stuff in a really big level. Okay, last thing I want to do, Command D to deselect that, because we're going to move on. I want you to actually take a look at this girl's shoulder. I'm going to zoom in. Yeah, if you take a look on her right side where she's holding that guy's hand, if you take a look underneath it, there is a little particle of dust that's on her shirt. It's on the purple part of the shirt. So what happens with dust is if you have a light background, dust shows up as dark. If you have a dark background, dust shows up as light. So if we go back to our history brush, so I'm going to grab the history brush, the one that's right underneath the clone stamp tool. It's still set to be lightening only. I'm going to come over, I'm going to make my brush smaller so that I can just paint on that little white piece of dust. And you'll see if you paint on it, nothing happens, because again, we've restricted the blending mode to only lighten stuff. Well, the light piece of dust is already lighter than everything else, so that there's no way it's going to work here. So you simply change your blending mode from lighten to darken, and then paint over that guy and it gets rid of it. So you can see if we actually go over to the guy's chest, that's where I want to go next. There is a big long scratch that runs through his chest. Again, I've got to change my brush to go from darken back to lighten. But then I can simply just run a line that goes straight up his chest and it gets rid of that entire scratch. You'll see other scratches, like there's a scratch on the surfboard and on his sleeve. We can just run down through all of this and it just knocks all of them out, and it's incredibly fast. So if you do film scanning and you end up with all of these unfortunate issues on here, this is just a really quick way to undo all the damage and get something that's usable. But you'll notice now, if I turn this top pixel retouch layer on and off, nothing changes relative to his face, to the sharpness, to the motion, to any of that stuff, whatever. Are we good on this? You can close that up. You don't need to save that. Oh, I want to open up, if you've got your image of the Skin As Retouch that you turned in, the assignment for this coming week is to actually redo it, just like we did on the Sunny version. I'm giving you, it's not a redo, I'm not going to go back and change your original grade, but it's a chance to take the feedback that you've gotten and actually continue to work on it, and it becomes just a whole new grade. So if you already did really well on this, you don't have to do it again. I will simply use the grade that you got from the original tonal retouching for the new assignment. But one of the things that we never got to in the new assignment was how to actually do the hair part of it. So again, you can either work on a virgin copy of this to do the hair work that we're going to do, or you can start a brand new copy of it. It doesn't matter. That part won't make a bit of difference. So we need to go back to our session number 6, I think is where it is. So in the assignment for 6, exactly, that's where it is. So again, I'm just opening up a version. I'm not going to worry about the skin retouch about this part here. I just want to go after the hair. Now, we've done something similar to this when we did Sunny, when we actually tried to patch the area of skin that was showing through her bangs. It was a very similar thing, and we're going to sort of do it here again. So my first move in this, everybody got a copy of this open, something to work with? All right, Command J to make a copy of it. Double click on this and call it Pixel Retouch. And say OK. Hit the L key for the lasso tool. Drag and grab every single bit of hair that you possibly can. The biggest mistake people make when they go to do this kind of work is that they'll make a selection that's too close or too tight around the hair part. And then all of a sudden you try to transform it or use it to actually do something else, and you run out of hair. So it's always better to make oversized selections when you're doing this kind of work. I'm going to jump this to its own layer, Command J. It brings it up to its own layer. And if I actually just move it around right now, it's in perfect register with what we've got going on in here. And so you'll end up getting repeating patterns if we use it. So I need to actually transform this thing first. So I'm going to hit Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. My first move is always to rotate. So I'm going to rotate this more to the left. But then I take this back. Hang on one second. I'm going to hit the little circle up at the very top that's got the line through it to cancel that out. I still have got my own jump layer, but I need to go to my pasteboard now because I want to be able to work outside of my image. So hit the F key one time and we're now on the pasteboard. I've still got my top layer right now that's just that hunk of hair. Now I'm going to hit Command T to transform this. But now you'll see as I rotate this to the side, I can actually stretch out the top and I can make it taller than the image, and I can also stretch out the bottom and I can make that taller than the image. I'm also going to crush this a little bit from both sides. I'm trying to make a new piece of hair to actually cover that hole that's in her head area right here. So I'm just using this transform to try to keep it from looking exactly like the piece that was already there. So I don't have any idea if this is enough of a transform, but that doesn't matter because I can continue to do this over and over and over again. So for me, I'm just going to leave it at this part right here. I'm going to click on the little check mark and say OK to that. So now this has been transformed. I'm going to hit the V key to get the move tool, and I'm going to just roughly move this into place so that it covers the area that I think is got that hole inside of her head. Again, we don't need to worry about this because we can fine tune this later. So once I get this sort of in place, I'm going to hold down my Option key and click on Add a Black Layer Mask. So that's going to hide everything right now. Then I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. I'm going to make sure that my brush, again, this is one of those tricky things where we're mixing old texture with new texture. I can't use 100% hard brush because I'll see the edge line of my brush if I do it, but I want a relatively hard brush because I don't want to mix old texture with new texture. If I keep my brush at its softest, that's exactly what will happen. The center part will be fine, but as you start to move out to the edges of a soft brush, it allows old texture to show through, and I don't want to mix those textures because it just fucks up her hair. So I'm going to set my hardness of my brush to, I'm going to try around to 75%, somewhere in there. It's more hard than it is soft, and so hopefully this is going to actually work well for me. I'm going to hit the D key to default my foreground and background colors to black and white. If white is your background color, hit X so that it is your foreground color, because we need to paint on this layer mask. We need to paint white on this layer mask in order to show the hair patch that I've actually created. So I'm just going to come up in this area where I see that big hunk of skin that's showing up above her eye, and I'm just going to click and run down. Now, when I do that, I notice that, okay, there's something wrong here. Looking up at my options palette, I've actually got my flow is set at 14%. That would be wrong, so I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. Make sure that my flow is all the way up at 100%, and then I'm going to do the same stroke again. So I'm going to bring it down, and you can actually see now when I did that, if we move in and take a look at this, you can actually see the edge where this brush started and where it ended. Now, the edge here is probably pretty good, but what's wrong about this is, if you could take a look at it, is that I'm starting brand new hair in the middle of her head, in the middle of nowhere. That's not going to work for me. What I need to do instead, take a look at my screen here really quickly. I'm going to hold down my Option key and just show you this is what's going on. This white stroke right here is actually showing me new hair, but where it's black above it, I'm still showing the old hair. So if I just take a look at these two, the old hair crashes into the new hair and you can spot it. However, if I click on my layer mask and continue that brush all the way out to the edge of her head, then I'm hiding other hair, but I no longer have that start-stop problem. So again, if we take a look at my layer mask now, this is what it looks like. And I'm going to zip back out just a little bit. So what I typically try to do with these is I will actually start new hair at the very top of my image or the side of it. I just try to hit the edges. You can also see that I haven't gone quite all the way to the edge at the bottom, so I don't even have to look at my mask. I'm just going to finish this off down here at the bottom. This, to me, is going to be a better place to actually start and do this with. In terms of not worrying about, again, old hair crashing into new hair and those lines being really obvious. So I'm going to click back on my layer mask. So when we take a look at this right now, you can see, well, the new thing, I've got part of her eye, I've got a third eye that's actually showing down here. Oh, I know, I could retouch for Windsor Castle in England. Have you guys been following what has gone on? Oh my God, you would have thought, okay, the worst thing that's happening in the world right now, you would say, well, maybe it's Ukraine or what's going on in Gaza. Oh no, it is the Mother's Day card that the Princess Kate of England released. She'd actually somebody retouched it. I'm not really sure she did it. Anyway, they released it to all these news agencies. A bunch of news agencies actually published it, and then everybody started looking pretty closely at it, and it's had the shit retouched out of it, and all of a sudden everybody is freaking out. It's on the cover of the New York Times, and it's just like, it's a fucking picture of the princess and her kids for Mother's Day. Do I really care? Anyway. But this is a problem right here, so you can see her eyeballs in there. However, my mask is in the right place. The mask is in the right place. What is in the wrong place is the shit that's underneath it. But you remember I said there's no way to really know until we get the mask actually going. So I need to move this patch so that I don't have the eyeball down here, so that it's really doing its work. But the problem is that if I move the mask, so I'm just going to hit the V key to move it, I move everything. And that's not going to help me right here. That just moves it and shows the other thing. That does not help me. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. Instead, if you click on the lock, it sits right between the pixel content of this patch and the mask. That little link in there separates the two. Now you can move them independent of one another. The mask is in the right spot. If I needed to move the mask, I would simply click on the mask and then grab the move tool and I could move it. But that's not what the problem is. The mask is actually in the right spot. It's covering that area that needs to be fixed. What's in the wrong spot is the pixel content. So with the pixel content selected, so again, I've got my little brackets that are around the pixel content, you can actually move this thing around and your mask part does not change. You can continue to transform this. Again, I'm not going to be transforming the mask now because these two things are separate. They are no longer locked together. So with the mask actually locked and my image, my pixel content selected, I'm going to hit Command T again and I can continue to work on this now. So I'm going to stretch it up to make it a little bit taller. I'm going to rotate it a little bit more. I'm going to pull it down in here. I'm feeling pretty good about that. I'm going to stretch it out even more and bring it down into here like this. And I'm feeling pretty good about that part, the mix in here. However, what I'll say about this is that when we do this, I'm also getting, again, it's beginning to sort of be somewhat of a repeating pattern. You need to make these a little bit more organic. And so to do that, with the transform still selected in here, if you take a look at the top of your options bar, all the way sort of towards the right-hand side, right next to the two icons that are, one are the circle with a slash through it, which is undo transform, or the check mark, which is to go ahead and submit it. Right next to that is this icon. It looks like a bent piece of graph paper. It's this thing right here. You can get to it here. There's the other place you get to it is if you come up to your edit menu, down to transform, it is the warp tool. So it's this warp right here. That's exactly the same thing as this guy right here. I typically just click on the one that's at the top, and when you do that, you'll see that your transform box gets divided up into a quadrant of 9 possible squares. These give me control to actually put bend into my transform. So I'm going to grab one of the control points. If you look at my screen right here, it's not going to be the corner control point. It's going to be one that's sort of in the middle. I can click this and I can actually push in, and you'll see I'm putting a curve now into her hair up here in the top. It tends to give my patch more originality or more organicness to it. I'm actually going to do the opposite down here at the bottom. I'm going to grab one of the control handles that's down at the very bottom of this and pull back, because I'm just trying to stretch over where the patch part's actually happening in here. And this seems to me to be better. I'm not looking at anything that I feel like is a direct repeat, even though the hair that's right next to this is what is making this image. But nonetheless, it feels like it's a little bit better for me. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the check mark to do that. And then the final thing that I've got is that I can see I can still see part of her eye down here at the bottom. that doesn't mean that I can't still work on my mask. So I'm going to click on my mask. I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush, hit the X key to make black my foreground color. So what I'm going to be doing is painting black on my layer mask, and it's going to hide this area that's the mistake, where I can still see another part of her eye. So I'm simply going to start at the top and work my way down to get rid of that part. And that's all I really need to do in this. And once I get this to this stage of the game, this needs to be part of my pixel retouching. So if we do your control key, hold down your your option key, and click on this, you can see this is what my patch looks like. So I've got solid hair from beginning to end. I've got some bend in here so that it actually makes it seem a little bit more organic, a little less pattern-like. I'm going to hold down my option key again and click on this. But now with your top layer selected, to make it part of the layer that's underneath it, hold down your command key and hit the letter E. And it will merge that down into the pixel retouching layer. And now this is part of my pixel retouching layer. Now, that's my first move. If you feel like now, I'm looking at this area down in here that feels like it just seems too straight to me. It needs some work, some help. There's nothing stopping you from doing this exact same thing all over again. So the L key to get the lasso tool, make a selection and make sure it's completely grabbing all of her hair. Command J to take this to its own point right here. I'm going to just start doing my bending stuff right now. I'm going to hit Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. I'm going to then go to the little thing that looks like the graph with it's the graph sitting on top of an arc. That gives me those control handles, and now I can come in and I can start to try to push some of this stuff around to just sort of see if I can get a little bit more bend or shape into it. You can still go back and rotate it. If you want to go back and rotate this, once you get your transforming part that you've actually done, if you've put a little bend in there, simply go to your edit menu, come back down to transform, and then you can click scale, and it'll go back to the regular transform dialog box where you can actually then click on it and move it around and change it around or whatever. Does this?
So are there easier ways to do this?
Are there easier ways to do this?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Probably the easiest way to do it right now is artificial intelligence. Just select it and say, fill this with hair.
Can we do that?
Sure, we can try that. I'm going to get rid of all of this part.
Because, like, just be honest, it doesn't look good.
Oh, well, I'm showing you technique. I am not spending the hour on this that I would spend to make this look good. I mean, I understand that part. This is more about technique, other than, if you're going to hold me to that, then you remember how much work I did on the tonal retouching one? I took out one line and one pimple, and that was it. If you had turned that in, you would have failed that assignment. Yeah, okay, so if we want to try and do this with artificial intelligence, again, go ahead and make a copy of your layer, so Command J to make a copy of it. To get to the artificial intelligence part, come on, if you don't see it, if you've got the toolbar that's always constantly showing for the artificial intelligence part, I think it's a huge pain in the ass, but nonetheless, we can try. There's a whole cornucopia of things that we can try to actually fix this part. The first thing before I actually go after the true artificial intelligence part, is I would just try to fill this using content aware. Again, content aware is something that we get to 2 or 3 classes from now, but apparently there's patience is thinning here, so we'll move on and just try it right now. So to get to the content aware part that I want to use, first make a selection of this. You need to get off of the pasteboard to do this because you'll never see the content aware box. So hit the F key once to go to the black pasteboard, F key again to get back to the little stoplight parts. Then I'm going to make a selection of this area for that I want to fix. So again, I'm just going to do, I've got my lasso key and I'm just doing a circle around that to go ahead and make that selection part. Then I'm going to come up to the edit menu, down to content aware fill. And when content aware fill does that, it's going to open up and you will actually see that you've got part of your image right now is covered in green. This is the original image. Then behind it is actually the result of all of this. And you can see it doesn't look really all of that good, but that's because it's using all of this image to actually make the patch to fill that. That's what this green is actually showing us. We don't want the patch for the hair to be anything except for hair. So to make sure that you've got to get rid of all of this green that's on everything else. So I'm going to zoom back out so that I can see this entire image. You'll have a brush, and it actually sits on this image. It's put on it by the Content Aware Fill dialog box. You can use this brush to paint away any of the green that is not sitting on hair. So I'm going to paint all of this away, because again, what you're telling Photoshop is, what do you want Photoshop to use to calculate this fix? And you're looking at for it just to be hair, so it's using her skin, it's using her eyes, her lips, her mouth, it's using everything here to create that patch, and that's why that patch looks awful. And I don't know, it may look just as awful once I get through all of this, but I doubt it. I'm certain it's going to look a little bit better. So all I'm doing is saying, okay, I don't want you to use any of this stuff to calculate that patch. It is actually going to run its again right now, and you can see that the patch that it's actually put in now is considerably better. I'm going to zip in here to take a look at it. So I'm not thrilled about it, but it's actually giving me something that I can begin to work with. However, there's other settings that are in this dialog box that we can actually look to see if it actually then gives us a better version of what's going on in this. And most of them are the color adaptations and the rotation. So under color adaptations, you can see I'm in this is the Content Aware Fill dialog box right here. In the fill settings, there's a thing that the first thing to go after is the color adaptation. It's set at default. If you click on that, you can come up and say none, and it will redraw. And you can see when that happens, it's breaking up. The hair almost looks shingled in here. So that's clearly not a good one for us to use. Then I'm going to go down to high. High actually brings a lot more darker hair pretty much up into the top. I'm going to come down to very high. And in very high, it does something really super weird down at the very bottom. So that's not going to work for me. I'm going to go back to my default settings. I feel like that part actually worked out much better for me. So it does. It fills in a whole lot better. I do have repeating pattern in here, but I can get rid of the repeating pattern after the fact if that's what I really want to do. So I'm going to look at the rotation. So this is actually going to rotate the patch. So I'm going to go to low and see if this helps or hurts. And it breaks up part of that, but I feel like I've got hair that's starting in the middle of nowhere up in the top, so I'm not going to keep low. It does parts of it better, but parts of it are much worse. I'm going to go to a medium rotation. So that puts a bend in it, but the bend does not look natural to me. So I'm going to go to high. High puts even more bend into it. So and I'm going to do full, but I'm fairly certain it's going to fuck it up way too bad for us to be, yeah. So this is not really usable for me. So I'm going to click on this back and go back down to low, which is what I think was the original default of this. No, the low is the shingling part. So I'm going to go back to none. So this looks the best to me right now. However, we're still not done. So in terms of the sampling error options, you can leave this rectangle part on, but you could also click on, if we go up to the top, I'm going to click on auto. That's actually going to add more back to her shirt again. So I'm going to go back to my rectangle. That picks everything else again. I'm going to go to custom, which means I'm going to actually have to paint everything that I want to be in here. So I'm going to say okay to that. I'm going to go back to rectangle, and again, I'm going to paint away all the part in here that I don't want considered. And see what it looks like. I feel like this is better for me right here. So that part, again, I've got some pattern in here, but I'm going to go ahead and say okay to this. So I'm going to click on okay. It's now changed that part to me. That doesn't mean, I'm going to hit Command D to deselect. That doesn't mean that I need to accept this in its entirety. So I'm going to zip into here, and I feel like, again, I've got hair that's starting and stopping in here that I don't really want in here. There's some weird coloring that's happening in here. There's no reason that I can't continue to work on this. I'm going to hit the S key to get the clone stamp tool. I'm going to make it a little bit larger, and then I'm just going to sample something that's up sort of, let's try, I'm I'm going to try over here on this far side over in here, up at the very top. Hold down my Option key and click to sample, and I'll come down, and I'm just going to try to break up some of this hair that's right in here where it just is sort of starting and stopping. So I'm going to just run a line down here. It's way too dark. Command Z to undo that. So I'm going to start my sampling up here at the top and see if I can't just soften this transition that's up into here. I see the start and stop point there, so that's not really going to work for me. I could soften up my brush, but then that's going to ruin the texture of the hair. So I'm going to just hit Command Z to undo that, and I'm just going to do a history snapshot of this right now to see. We're going to do some comparison. So I'm going to click on my history snapshot, and I'm going to call this Content Aware Fill. So Content C-A-F, Content Aware Fill, and say OK to that. And then I'm going to go back below my Content Aware Fill, back to my lasso tool again. So with the lasso tool, I'm going to hit Command D to deselect that. Still working on this layer. I'm going to try the next artificial intelligence part. To get to that, it's in the Healing Brush series. So in the Healing Brush series, if you come to that, click on it. Again, it's a flyout menu. It's got spot healing at the top. That's not really going to help me. I'm actually going to go after the Remove tool. Again, this is another piece of AI technology, so I'm going to click on Remove tool. With the Remove tool, what you do is you paint on areas that you want to be removed. I want this area of her skin to be removed. So I'm going to simply click on this. That's the history brush, so hang on one second. Command Z to undo that. Again, click on the Remove tool, not the Healing Brush tool. The Remove tool. Make my brush smaller. Again, it's just a normal brush. It's got an edge to it. I can do positive or negative here. And I'm simply going to paint, and you'll see it puts on this sort of magenta color. And I'm just going to paint across that area and let go and see what happens. You have to be online to use this tool, I think. So the Remove tool does a fair job of it. Again, it's putting in a repeating pattern that I've got right in here. I can sort of see it in here. So I'm going to try Healing Brush instead, or I could try Remove tool again. If I don't like this pattern right in here, I'm just going to run the Remove tool across it again, and we'll see what happens. And Command Z it back and forth. Yeah, that's a much better fix for me. So I kind of like what's going on in here. I'm going to go ahead and do another snapshot of this and call it the Remove tool. And say OK. And then again, I've done 2 history stages of remove. So I'm going to go back again to deselect to bring back my thing right here. And the last thing I'm going to do is the real sort of super artificial intelligence-y part. Again, you want to make sure that you're online to use this. To get to it, you need to use the taskbar to get. I don't like the taskbar showing up the whole time, so I hide mine. To get it back, come up to your window menu, click and come all the way down to contextual taskbar. This brings up the thing that is supposed to be, again, you know, the whole, it's supposed to anticipate what you want to do given the tools that you've got selected. So you can see right now that I have got a Remove tool part going here. It's wondering if what I want to do in here is to either select my subject or remove the background, or I don't want to do any of those kind of things here. Instead, I'm going to hit the L key to get my lasso tool. Again, I'm not the Remove tool. Hang on one second. Command, no, cancel. Undo that. L key. I'm going to select this whole area. In my taskbar, you've now got a thing that says Generative Fill. You want to go, so for us right now, what we want to do is we want to simply fill this thing. I don't want to fill this thing with water. I don't want to fill it with balloons. I don't want to fill it with, I just want to get it to go away. To do that, click on Generative Fill, and in the prompt box, this is where you would put in, oh yeah, fill that with water, or fill that with whatever you want to fill with. Simply leave it blank. Don't do anything and click on generate. So once you click on generate, it actually does the generative fill here, and you have options. So if you take a look at your properties panel right now, you can see that you've got variations. You've got the first one, that's the visible one. It's the one that's got the box around it. If you click on the one that's right next to it, it is a different one that's actually showing too much skin, so I don't like the second one. You can click on the third one. The third one actually I think is the strongest of the group. However, if you feel like that none of these work for you, you can click on the generate button again. I'm going to do the one that's in the properties panel and just say, I want you to do another set for me. Now, it's not going to get rid of your first 3 versions. I actually think that third version was pretty good here, but I'm going to see what it looks like to get a whole nother set, to get 3 more versions of here. So now I'm looking at version 4, then at version 5. Version 5 actually looks pretty good as well, and then version 6. So 5 and 6 and 3 look pretty good to me. So this would be 3, 5, and 6. I'm going back to 3. So for me, the third, the version 3, I think was the best one in here. So that's the one that I'm actually going to pick for here. And so this is now my generative fill dialog box. And again, I can do the very same thing here. I'm just going to merge this down into my pixel retouching. Command E merges it down, and now I've actually got that fixed by generative fill. If you want to see what your other ones look like, I am going to go back up. I'm going to go ahead and do a snapshot of this right now, and that'll be my generative fill one. So I can look at the very first one. That's the content aware one. This is the remove tool, which is pretty good, but there's a serious pattern that's right in here. And then this last one is the generative fill, which I think looks pretty good. Better? You can close this up, and we're going to do a quick break. So I'm going to call this 25 after. If you guys could be back at 35 after, a hard 10. We got a lot to get through today. Okay. So anyway, I'm going to stop throwing that out there. I think everybody in here is feeling comfortable enough, so I'm just going to continue on with this. Okay, so our first move, like we've done with everything else, is that we do not want this to be all the liquify work that we're going to do on here. Even though we're going to do it as a smart object, it is, in my opinion, destructive. So I want to go ahead and make a copy of this just so that I can always go back. So Command J will actually make a copy of this, and then right off the bat, we need to turn this into a smart object. Again, liquify is a transform, and transforms are non-destructive as long as they're done to a smart object, and so that's what we're going to do this with. So up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, and convert to smart object. There's now a million ways of doing this, so this is one way of doing it. You could also come to the filter menu and just down to convert for smart filters. That's the same thing. You can also control click on the right side of your layer and come down to do a convert to smart object. I mean, it's all over the place. So just realize it all does the exact same thing. And then up to the filter menu and down to liquify. So liquify originally, like if you go back 3 or 4 years, liquify did not work on smart objects, which caused us to actually do a whole other series of working with meshes. Some of that language is still in the assignment for this, but we'll take a look at that. But at any rate, in the liquify, when you use this tool, it pretty much like the select and mask workspace and like other things that we've sort of worked in, this brings us into a completely separate program. Now, this program is running inside of Photoshop, but it has a completely different layout. It's got a different set of palettes. It's got a different set of everything. We need to go through all of these and explain what they all do, and then I will show you the basic way to make things work, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so just realize that we are no longer really in Photoshop, and there's a reason for that, because there's certain things that are labeled in here that are different they use different language than Photoshop actually uses. So I just want to sort of set that up, and then we will jump in here and start. So we are going to typically, I'm going to show you the tools. You can use your tablet for this, but the tablet really comes into play when you're really doing this work. The demo stuff that I'm going to show you right now is going to be pretty just hardcore and hit it and somewhat brutal in here. So you don't need, it doesn't really matter. You can be doing this on a trackpad right now. It's not, that part's not going to really matter. I want to start at the very top on the tools on the very top left-hand side. This is where you actually do the tools that do the manipulation in here and also undo the manipulation. So we're going to start with the tool at the very top, and if you click the tool at the very top, it's the one with the finger pointing down. If you hover over it for a little bit, you will actually get a drop-down that tells you what it is. They call this the forward warp tool. When you click on this tool, you have on the other side a set of properties that control the tool. We don't have an options bar here, but this stuff functions and works very similar to an options bar. So you can see that there's a size adjustment here. If you hover your tool over this, you'll see that I've got a brush that's about this size. You can still use the keyboard shortcuts for this to make your brush larger or smaller. So the bracket keys that are just to the right of the P key will make your brush smaller. It will make it larger. The thing that's important to realize about this, though, is every single one of these tools has a separate set of property options. So if I say do the forward warp tool right now with a brush size that's 800 pixels, and then I go to the next tool right under it, which is the reconstruct tool, it could have a brush size of 1,000 or a brush size of 10. It doesn't, none of this is sticky. None goes, everyone keeps their own individual settings. There's also a set of properties in here that do not apply to all tools. So some tools, for instance, in this case, if you look at rate, we'll talk about what rate is when we get to a tool that actually uses rate. The forward warp tool does not use rate, so if you click on this, you can't move it. So anyway, brush size is pretty evident. Density, unfortunately, should be called hardness, because this is how hard or soft your brush really is. So if you want to take a look at that, I'm going to actually ask you to go down in the tool set on the left-hand side, and you want to come down to the first tool that looks like, well, it's this tool right here. It's the freeze mask tool. So there's two tools here that look like they've got sort of like almost like a pencil or a brush clicking on it. Anyway, it's the freeze tool. It's right under the one that looks like it's a arrow between two sets of checkerboards. If you click on that tool and then come over and look at your properties panel, in my case I've got a face aware liquify panel that's occupying the majority of my screen right here. If you click on the little arrowhead, you can collapse that and you can see the rest of the other tools, the properties that we're going to work with. We will get back to what the face aware tool, liquify tool does in just a little bit. But in this case, I'm going to come down and I just want to take a look at down here on sort of like the middle. There's a thing that says show mask. You need to make sure that that's checked in order to see what we're really doing here. So I've selected the freeze mask tool. I'm going to make my brush considerably larger. And then I'm going to make the density 100, and so my brush size is about a 400. And I'm simply going to come over to this image and I'm going to click once. And you can see that this is the sort of edge that it puts on that. And then I'm going to take my density and drop it all the way down to 0 and make another click. And this gives you an idea of the brush. So again, a density of 0 is an extremely soft brush. A density of 100 is an extremely hard brush. Why they don't rename this shit and call it hardness, because that's exactly what it is. Don't ask me. I don't know. They don't. To get rid of those two little dots that we just put down, if you click on, come up under mask options, click on none, and they will actually go away. If my screen will ever catch up. So then anyway, I want to go back up to the forward warp tool here, so the one up at the very top. So size we've explained, density we explained, pressure we're going to take a look at in just a second, but you can think of pressure, if you hover over it, it'll give you a little drop down menu eventually. If you click over, if you click over the word, it says change brush distortion strength. we're going to take a look at what this is. The default pressure typically is 50, so I'm going to set mine up to 50 or really close to it. And then I'm simply going to come over to my image. I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller. I'm going to zoom into my image. The keyboard shortcuts are still work for this. So if you hold down the space bar and the command key, you'll temporarily get the magnifying glass and you can zip in. And I'm just going to take the forward warp tool and I'm going to drag it across his body right to left. And you can see that's what this tool does. It pushes this image. Again, it pushes it in front of where you're at. Now, unlike a lot of tools, you can actually do just the opposite. I can come over to the left side now, click and drag back. None of these things are destructive. Now, we've talked about destruction in transforming inside of Photoshop. And we said, we already looked at, if you remember the car, we made it really small and then we made it really big again and it completely was destroyed. That does not happen here in Liquify. You can do stuff back and forth and it will not degrade your image here at all. None of this is destructive. So anyway, this is what the tool does. If we actually amp the pressure all the way up and do the same thing, you will see that its distortion is considerably more strong. If we grab the pressure and drag it all the way down, you will see that it is much, much, much less. So I'm clicking across this, it's not even doing anything. So that's basically where pressure is. Again, I'm gonna go back into the 50s and then you'll see one of the tricks about working with Liquify is that you want to do every change that you make in Liquify, you want to be as slow and methodical and take your time about it as you can. You don't want to do big changes. You want to do, instead of one big change, you want to do many small, subtle little changes. So to get back to where we were, to undo all of this stuff right here, Command Z does work in here, but I've already done 3 steps in this. An easier way to undo all of that is if you look at the bottom of your properties panel, there is a button down on the lower right hand side that says Restore All. If you click on that, it will bring everything back. So this is basically the way that the forward warp tool actually works. We're going to do another, just do another sort of like hit this body a couple times harder just so that I can show you some other things that are going to happen. The tool that's right underneath it is the Reconstruct tool. So if you click on the Reconstruct tool, again, you will see it's got its own size. I'm going to make mine a little bit larger. It does have density, it does have pressure. I'm going to bring my pressure back up to a 50 as well. But this one now also has rate, and we're going to look at the difference in those two. So I'm going to come over, and the 2 distortions that I did in the top part of his body, I'm simply going to hover my brush over it. I'm not going to move my brush. I'm just going to put my mouse down. And you can see when you put your mouse down, it made a little bit of change. Again, it's going to restore this eventually to what it was before we did any of the forward warp part. If, on the other hand, you click on this and you move your brush back and forth, you can see that that motion begins to restore this part. That all has to do, that is all affected ultimately by rate. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that, to go ahead and bring the distortions back in. I'm going to grab my rate and take it all the way up to 100% now. I'm going to hover over again those 2 distortions and then again simply click once. And you can see I don't even have to move. When I click, that whole thing just starts to actually restore. I'm going to come down here to the bottom and do the same thing. Just click and continue to hold. It will bring it all the way back without having to move your brush at all because of the rate that you have actually changed this to be. I'm going to reset my rate at a 50 as well. Again, I'm going to keep myself kind of in the middle for a lot of these tools. I am going to go back down and click on Restore All again. I'm then going to grab my forward warp tool one more time. I'm going to make it really small now, so I'm going to make it down a little bit. So mine's 100 pixel size on this, and I'm just going to do a whole set of bumps on his sort of like these same strokes that I've been doing onto his chest and to his body. So I'm just going to start to move this stuff in to just bang this like this, and you can see you've made a whole lot of really weird shapes in here. The next tool down, the 3rd tool down now, is the Smooth tool. So I'm going to make this tool a little bit larger. Again, I'm going to leave the density at 50. I'm going to grab my pressure up to 50 as well and my rate up to 50 as well. So what this tool does is it does a very slow, controlled restore. And its job is to try to smooth out all of these bumps. So if you take the brush and you do a stroke down along his body, you can see it's not like the other tool that did a complete restore on this. This is actually trying to keep some of the liquefying that we've done, some of the making his chest and his stomach thinner. It's keeping some of those elements, but it's smoothing out those really jagged, sort of like, mountain shape, cone shapes that we actually had when we were doing that. If you run the brush down it again and you keep doing this with your smooth brush, eventually your smooth brush will get you all the way back to where you had in the beginning. It will be like the reconstruct tool, but it paces yourself. So the way I tend to think about this a lot is that if you've got a person who you're actually narrowing it, for me, whenever I'm doing stuff like this, I always think it makes it look somewhat like cellulite. And then this will actually just smooth that part out. That's basically what this tool is about. I'm going to click on Restore All again. The next tool down is the Twirl Clockwise tool. If you click on this, I'm going to make this tool about a little bit larger than this guy's head. So in my case, I've got 700 pixels if you want the same thing. Again, I'm going to leave my density at 50. I'm going to bring my pressure up to 50. I'm going to also drag my rate down to 50. And then I'm just going to hover over his head and I'm going to click and hold the brush. And you can see I'm not moving at all, but it is twirling his head. It's twisting his head to the inside. If you add the Option key now or the Alt key on Windows, it gives you the exact opposite. So instead of twisting clockwise, it will twist counterclockwise. The speed with which this does it is all rate. So if you grab rate and you drag it up to 100, hold down your Option or Alt key and click, you'll see that it actually does the distortion for him much quicker. If you hit a Restore All to undo all of that and then grab your pressure and take that all the way up and then hover over his head and simply click, you can see that I've actually done the strongest of all. I've got the strongest amount of pressure and the highest rate to do this, so the distortion happens incredibly fast, and the strength with which it distorts this or liquefies this is also incredibly strong. So, yes? So again, just holding down either the Option key or Windows on the Alt key, either one. The other thing that you can do is the tool that's right under, I take that back, that's not the tool that's right underneath it. This is interesting, they have some tools where they give you two tools that do just the opposite of one another. In this case, it's just the one tool, but again, the Option key will actually spin it in the other direction. So I'm gonna hit Restore All again. The next tool down is the Pucker tool. So I'm going to put the Pucker tool again. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, so we'll keep it about, a little bit larger than his head. But I'm going to put this right on sort of the center of his head. If you, again, I'm going to leave the density at 50. I'm going to bring the pressure in this case. Oh, I don't have pressure in this case. So the strength with which this happens is not going to change, but the rate can change. So I'm going to put my rate at a 50 again. I'm going to hover right over the center of his, sort of the middle of his head, his temple, and simply click and hold it. And you can see what's happening here is it's actually doing what they call pin cushioning. It's actually, or a pucker here, it's actually drawing the outside sort of towards the in and then towards the center, and then the center is getting increasingly smaller. It might be easier to see this if you do this right down on his hand, on his stomach. If you click and you hold this, and you'll see it's actually pulling stuff in from the outside. If you hold down your Option key or the Alt key and click, you will get the opposite behavior. This would actually be the bloat tool. This actually makes it larger. However, the tool that's right underneath the Pucker tool is the bloat tool. So if you click on the bloat tool, and again, I'm going to make this brush a little bit larger, and click, you can see that it will make him larger. If you hold down the Option key or the Alt key and click, you'll see that it actually makes him smaller. So again, larger, smaller, larger, smaller. Make sense to everyone? All right, click on Restore All. The next tool down is the Push to the Left tool, and this is somewhat misnamed tool. It does push things to the left, but only if you move in one certain direction. So I'm going to put this brush really close to his stomach, and I'm going to click and drag up. And when you click and drag up, it pushes pixels to the left. If you click and drag down, it pushes pixels to the right. If you hover over the top of his head and you click and you go from right to left, it lifts things up. If you drag from right to left, it pushes things down. If you hold down your Option key, it does the reverse behavior. So again, I just held down the Option key and it continues to push down instead of pushing up. Does this make sense, everybody, what's going on here? We go on this part, click on Restore All again. The next tool down is the Freeze tool. This is a tool that we've already used, but I'll show you exactly how this thing works. So I'm going to actually freeze the back part of this guy's head. So I'm going to click and drag down, and you'll see it paints this red line. Now the red line, or this red area here, they call this a mask, even though this isn't technically a mask like it is in Photoshop. If you look at the show mask, if you don't have your show mask on and you actually try to do a freeze, it'll give you a warning saying you need to show the mask if you want to see what you're freezing. You also can change the color of this. So if you look over in your properties panel, you can click on this drop down menu and say, okay, I don't want this to be red, I want this to be green. So it'll make it green. The reason they change these is that if you're working on an image that is primarily red, you won't be able to see the mask that you're putting on here. So it allows you to change the color. I'm going to go back to red because that is its default. Now I'm going to grab the Forward Warp tool, again, the tool that's up at the very top. I'm going to make my brush larger. I'm going to get the pressure all the way up. And then I'm just going to hit his face against this thing. And you can see that what ends up happening is that with the Freeze tool, it actually builds a line that will not allow the liquefy to go any further. So this is a way that you can restrict your liquefying to only certain areas. You can protect areas that keep it from being liquefied. And for us, this becomes really important because we want to use as large a brush in this as we can, because larger brushes create subtler, subtler liquefies, subtler modifications, but the brush can get to be so large that it ends up impacting areas that you don't want to have changed. So you would freeze those areas and then go to a really large brush. I'm going to hit a Restore All again. You'll notice that Restore All does not change your mask. If you want to actually change your mask, you need to go to the next tool down, which is the Thaw tool or the Defrost tool. It also has its own brush sizes. You can now paint with this to actually remove areas. So it's just a way to freeze and thaw things. There's a couple of other controls that affect the mask. So if you come over to the mask options, if you click on None, it gets rid of all of your masking. If you click on Mask All, which is in the middle, it will put a mask on everything. And then we don't have changed anything, but I'm going to show you what Invert All does in just a second. But let's say that I only wanted to manipulate this guy's head. I didn't want to manipulate anything else in my photograph. I'm going to hit None on this. I could grab the Freeze tool and I could try to freeze everything in the image. I'm going to paint the whole thing except for his head. That's ridiculous. It takes too long. Instead, you hit the Mask All. It puts a mask on everything, and then you hit your Thaw tool, make your brush bigger, and then you simply thaw out his head. And then you're off to the races. It's just much faster to do it that way. If you click the Invert All, it simply flips your mask. So everything that was frozen is thawed. Everything that was thawed is now frozen. So that's basically all that's going on here. Again, I'm going to go back to None on this. And then finally, the last three tools that are down at the bottom. The top one is the Face tool. We don't have a face in this that we can really work with. Face tool really needs to see almost a pair of eyes. We'll take a look at the Face tool at the end of today. And then finally, you have the Hand tool, which just lets you move around. It's the same thing as in Photoshop. You get the shortcut for it is your space bar that you can click and you move around. And then finally, the magnifying glass, it's the same. It also uses those very same shortcuts as in Photoshop. Command, Option, no matter what tool. So if I go to the Forward Warp tool and I hold down the space bar, I get the Hand. If I hold down the space bar and the Command key, I get the plus magnifying glass, and if I add the Option key, I get the minus magnifying glass. So that's basically what we've got going on here. We're going to do one other thing here to show you really quick. So go up to your forward warp tool, and I want you to, again, do some really strong, weird things to his body. If you look down at the very bottom, then again, next to the Restore All, just to the right of that is the Reconstruct tool. If you click on that, it will open up a dialog box. This is like the Fade tool in Photoshop. And what this will allow you to do is to incrementally reduce this. So 100% is all of your distortion. If you drag this back to 0%, it's all the way back to completely undone. You can have this be somewhere in the middle. The thing you need to remember about this tool, though, is it does it to the entire image. You can't do this for just like the last motion that you made on here. Is everybody good about this part? All right, I'm going to click on the Restore All, and then we're simply going to start working on this image. Again, I'm not going to do radical body modification on here, but we are going to do some. I am going to go to my tablet right now. All right, I'm going to start with the push to with the forward warp tool. So again, the thing that I've told you about this is that you want to use as big a brush as that you can and do the slowest motions that you can. So all I'm going to do is to pretty much thin out his stomach right now. So to do that, I'm going to leave my density at 50. I'm going to take my pressure all the way back down to 50. I'm going to see if this still works for me. My brush size right now is around a 400. I feel pretty good about that. I'm going to actually zoom into this area. A lot of times when I zoom into this areas like this, the tool actually takes off on me. So anyway, I'm going to leave it in like this. So I just want you to watch my screen when I do this first, and then you can do the same thing. So I'm going to start with the brush edge only touching his stomach. I'm not going to do the center part of his stomach like this. I'm going to start with the edge right here, and I'm simply going to tap and push in. And you can see it does a really small little motion in here. I'm going to stop at that, and I'm going to come down. And I'm just tapping now. Every single one of these little movements is just a small little tap, and I'm working my way up and down to just sort of see how I want to bring this in. And again, you don't need to worry about going too far. If you go too far in here, you can actually click and pull it back out again. But that's basically what I'm trying to do right here. So at this stage of the game, I'm going to stop. I'm going to make my brush smaller. Again, I'm using the bracket keys that are right next to the P key to make my brush smaller. I'm going to actually do some work on his pant waist right here. I'm going to lift it up. You see his pants are actually tilting forward. I'm actually going to grab the bottom of these pants and start to bring them up. And again, I'm doing small little taps here. If I feel like this is distorting the waistline of this belt too much right here, I'm going to go after my Restore tool. So again, it's the next tool down. I'm going to make it smaller so that I don't restore the work I did on his stomach, but I am going to just paint across to restore the area that's on that was just on his waist. Again, it's not happening fast enough for me, so I'm going to bump my rate up on this to get it to go a little bit quicker. It can also be pushing my density of my brush up a little bit as well so that I can actually hit that edge. And it'll bring that in. It'll get my correction back a little bit faster. And then again, I'm going to go after the tool, the push to the left tool. In this case, I'm going to make it a little bit larger. Push this in a little bit more again, and then raise it up. Push it in a little bit more, and lift this whole thing up. So I'm just working my way to just try to give him this waistline of his pant. I can't undo the curl under of that waistline, but I can bring everything else up. If I feel like I pulled this top part up a little too much, I can make my brush even smaller and pull this back down a little bit. So you can play with this quite a bit to actually get it to work. I'm going to push the pant, his whole fly in just a little bit here to bring that part in. And so this is beginning to work pretty well for me. I'm going to zip back out again. There is a preview button that's at the very bottom of your properties panel. If you click your preview on and off, you can actually see the changes that you've made. So this is a good beginning for me to actually start in this. And I'm going to stop at this point and merely say OK. So when you do this, OK will actually give you a smart filter now. If you want to go back in and continue to work on this, you want to actually double click on the liquefy filter here. So I'm going to double click on this, and it will bring me back into the liquefy space, and all of those changes will still be there, and I can then continue to work on this stuff. So other things that I might do on this is I'm going to actually build his chest out just a little bit. I'm also going to do a little bit work on his arms. I'm going to work on his arms first. So to work on his arms, I feel like I want to give him a little bit more muscle tone in his upper arm, but I feel like his bottom arm is like really narrow and skinny. Now, this could come from his actual physical physique, or it could come from the angle that we're actually shooting it at. So if you take a look at his arm, the upper part of his arm, this part right here, is actually broad to the camera, but this lower part of his arm, my feeling is that it's from the side like this. Instead of being flat like this, it's more from the side, so you're getting it. So anyway, it doesn't look right to me, so I want to actually build this up a little bit more. To do that, you can actually use the bloat tool to do it. So I'm going to click on the bloat tool. I'm going to make my brush considerably smaller. So if we come over to his arm right now, again, I've got my pressure. I have no pressure with the bloat tool. My size is correct. I'm going to keep my brush density around 50, and I'm also going to leave the rate around 50. If you come over to his arm and you simply click once and you tap down, it'll actually do a small change. I'm going to click and tap down again, and you'll notice I've got this really weird thing that's happening to his stomach. And if I click on here to actually do a bloat here, I'm just going back and forth. I've got some really strange anomaly that's actually happening in here. And it's almost like his stomach has now come all the way back out. There's something that's clearly wrong. When this happens to you, what is in all likelihood happening here is there is a problem with your video resources. So in my case, I'm fairly certain this is because I'm actually using, I've got a recording going on here, I've got Photoshop open here, I've got all of this going on in here. I'm gonna hit cancel out of this to go back. It's still then got just his stomach work done. But what the problem is with this is it's actually your video card. So to temporarily turn your video card off, you come up to your Photoshop menu, down to Preferences, down to Performance. And in Performance right here, you need to uncheck Use Graphic Processor and say OK. Hopefully this is not going to cause me to do a restart, but we're going to find out right now. I'm going to double click on Liquify again. And it's going to say that, oh, Liquify supports hardware acceleration. You want to turn that on. And I would say, yeah, if you fuckers at Adobe would get this shit to work right with my computer, I would leave it on. But you don't. So this will bring me back in, and you'll see now the process starts to be very slow because I don't have hardware acceleration on. But now I'm going to try to do that same bloat work for his arm again. So again, I'm going to click on the bloat tool. I'm going to zip back out enough to see if this is actually impacting, or I'm getting that same glitch again. So I'm going to start down at his wrist, and I'm going to simply click, and it's not affecting the glitch. So I'm good to go from now on. If you click and drag, you will actually get it to do work against a run along the whole arm. But again, that defeats what I was trying to tell you, the way I think you should be dealing with this. You should do these motions small and separate and discrete. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. Instead, I'm going to tap at his wrist, and then I'm going to come up and tap again at his forearm, come up and tap again at his other arm, tap again to get this a little bit bigger. If you want this to happen a little bit faster, go ahead and push your rate up into like the 60s or 70s. Now when you click, you'll see it actually happens a little bit faster. And I can continue to work this thing up to get his arm a little bit better. So again, if you click on your preview to turn it on and off, you can see that we're actually building it out. It looks like his arm is a little bit distorted here. So to fix that, I'm not going to use the bloat tool. I'm going to go to the forward warp tool. And I'm going to then open up his arm just a little bit here to get a smoother line along his arm. Then I'm also going to get rid of that, his elbow, probably his funny bone that's actually sticking out. I'm going to push that part in so that's a little bit better in here. So this feels a little bit better in terms of where I'm going with this. Again, I'm going to turn the preview on and off, and I'm feeling pretty happy about that. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to this. So working like this repeatedly is fine. All of this will be kept in your Liquify smart filter right here. Again, if you click its eyeball and turn it off, you'll see this is your original image, your untransformed image. If you turn it back on, you will actually see it will go back. One of the problems that people have, though, is this next move. So a lot of people feel like, okay, I want to continue to do some more work on this. And instead of clicking on liquefy right here, they do this. They go, you can do this with me, come back up to the filter menu, down to liquefy again, and say okay. And now when we come into our image, it's the way the image actually looked. And I'm just going to do something really radical here. I'm going to grab the liquefy tool, and I'm just going to run it through his pants a couple of times. And then I'm going to say okay to this. What happens now, though, is that we've got two versions of liquefy. If you take a look at your smart filter down here, there's a liquefy 1 and a liquefy 2. This is now a destructive move. It was non-destructive as long as we only had one version of liquefy going. But now I'm actually distorting a version of this that's already been distorted. Does that make sense? So I'm going to go back in history and undo that second liquefy. So I'm going to go back in there. So it's now undone in history. And then again, your best method is to double click on this single liquefy, go back in and continue to do your work inside here, inside of liquefy. So the last thing I'm going to do here really quickly, because again, we don't need to do tons of stuff here, is to give him a little bit more of a chest. So I'm going to use the bloat tool to actually do that guy as well. I'm going to make my brush considerably larger. And then again, I'm going to take my rate down to around a 50. I don't want this to take off on me. And I'm going to click on his chest right here and see what happens. And as I click and tap on his chest right here, you can see that it not only actually is building his chest in, but unfortunately, it's also changing his face. So if we take a look at the image right now, turn your preview on and off, you can see it shoved his whole chin up into his face. That's not going to work for me. So I'm going to click on the Restore tool. So the Reconstruct tool, the second one down, I'm going to make my brush considerably larger. And I'm simply going to paint over that whole area to restore his chest. Again, I'm not hitting his arms or his stomach or anything else. Then I'm going to freeze his face. So again, the tools that are over on the left-hand side that I can't get to now. The tools on the other side, you need to pick the freeze tool. So again, it's the one that's right under the push to the left tool. And I'm going to make my brush smaller. And I'm going to come over here and I'm going to freeze his face. I'm going to freeze his arm. And also, I'm going to come down and I'm going to freeze his hand. Clearly, I've done something weird in his stomach right here. But actually, I'm going to hit cancel out of this and then simply click on liquefy again to come back in. Because when I did the reconstruct on his body, it screwed up his stomach part, and I don't want that part to be. So again, freeze tool right now, freeze his face and his neck, front part of his face, freeze his arm, freeze his hand, because I don't want any of these things to change. Then I don't like looking at the freeze tool. It's really hard for me to judge what I'm doing. It's distracting. So I uncheck show mask. It's still frozen, but I don't see it. And now I can go to the bloat tool and actually then start to click just on his chest. And that's actually not the bloat tool. That's the pucker tool, the bloat tool that's right underneath it, and start to push here on his chest. And you can see I'm making a little bit larger. You can also go to the push forward warp tool and reshape this just a little bit so it's not quite so obvious. And then again, I'm going to use my preview on and off. And this is basically where we have taken him. If I feel like this is a little too strong, what I've done here, again on the front part of him, I can go to the smooth tool, because this will allow me to go back in time and reconstruct a little bit, a little less fast, and simply click on that part to smooth all of this part out. And then say, okay. And so this is my difference. This is actually what I've done in here. So, are there questions about any of this stuff? Are we good on this part? All right. We've got 8 minutes. And I just want to look at one last thing. You can close him up. You don't need to actually do him at all. You can say don't save that. We're going to do something that is possibly a little bit more palatable to deal with in here. There is also in your week number 8, there is a file called Twin Sisters. If you can open that up into Photoshop. So again, I'm going to do the same trick that I did here before. We are going to liquefy this, but we're just going to do the facial stuff here just so that you can see how this part works. So Command J to make a copy of this. Again, we need to change this into a smart object. So up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, convert to smart object, and then into liquefy. So up to the filter menu, down to liquefy. Say OK when you get that warning. So in this space right here, if you want to actually deal with facial features, you can use all the tools that we've used before. You can do the freeze tools and the push forward warps tools. You can do all of those tools. But Photoshop in the last, 2 or 3 years ago, developed this thing that brings in face aware liquefy. So if you go over to your properties panel, it's a drop down menu. And in the face liquefy part right here, hopefully this thing is going to recognize my faces. I'm getting this warning saying it isn't, and my guess is that I don't have enough power to do this, so I'm going to try turning my graphics card back on. So again, up to Photoshop, Preferences. If you're on Windows, it's Edit, Preferences, Performance, and I'm going to go ahead and turn my graphic processor back on and say OK. And then again, go back into liquefy. And yes, that was what my problem was. So now you'll see in the Face Aware Liquefy, there's a drop-down menu called Face 1 and Face 2. I'm going to leave it on Face 1. It actually is able to recognize different faces in here. So Face 1 is going to be the girl on the left. If you hover over this, you'll see that there are actually controls for reshaping her eyes. There's ones for reshaping her nose, for reshaping her mouth, for dealing with her face shape. So we're going to take a look at these one at a time. If we come over to eye size, if you click on, again, I've got select face number 1 is the one that's in there. Eye size, if you hover your cursor over the label that says eye size, you get the scrubby slider. You can use either that, or you can use the little arrow that's on the bar at the very bottom. Either one, you can click and drag it, and you'll see that it's making her eye larger. You can also go in the opposite direction and make her eye smaller. It's only affecting her left eye though. If you double click on this, it'll zero it back out, or it should, because that's what happens in every other thing of Photoshop, but in this case it's not, so I'm going to just drag across it and type it in 0. If you want this work to happen to both of the eyes, you need to click on the chain link between the two. So if you click on the chain link between the two and then start to drag this thing forward, you'll notice that it drags both of them forward. Now, you can make both of the eyes bigger. Classically, this is something that happens in advertising. It's happened in movies, advertising for movie posters ever since movies were made. But what you'll see with a lot of people, myself being one of them, is that eye size is not the same. If you want symmetry in eyes, usually one eye is smaller than the other. This is a great tool to actually fix that. It's not the only thing that we can do. If we come to eye height, we're going to click on that, and you'll see that it actually opens her eye up a little bit more. If you come to eye width, you'll actually see it makes her eye a little bit wider. And then eye tilt will actually rotate her eye up and down, or clockwise and counterclockwise. So that's basically what's going on in here. Eye distance will actually separate her eyes further apart or bring them closer together. In terms of coming down, we're going to actually change over to the other girl's face right now. If you click on the drop-down menu and go to face number 2, we're going to actually deal with her nose in face number 2. So the controls that you have on here are height. If you click on her nose to bring her nose up, you will make it a positive value, makes it a little bit shorter. Negative value makes it a little bit longer. You can go to nose width. Again, one direction makes it wider, one direction makes it more narrow. Again, you would never be doing all of these at these full 100%. So these are really subtle moves that you have in here. I'm going to go back to my face number 1 girl because I think it's a better one to actually demonstrate the smile parts, or her mouth part. So in the smile part here, this is the least convincing of the ones I think that actually do this. If you click and pull to the right, you actually give her more of a grin. If you pull to the left, you bring it down a little bit. Again, a very subtle move in here can do wonders, but the real extreme edges of this, I think, are too obvious. It just makes it cartoonish-like. You can take the upper lip and you can actually lift it up a little bit or bring it down a little bit, so it's basically how thick her upper lip is. You can do the same thing with her lower lip. You can make it larger or smaller. You can do her mouth width. You can make the whole entire grin wider or more narrow. And then the height of this will actually change it makes her mouth entirely bigger, but it not only makes it taller as it's getting closer to her nose, but it also pushes her lower lip down as well. So it actually makes it larger top to bottom is the way I would actually phrase this part. And then finally, the last thing that you can change in here is her face shape. So if you grab forehead and you actually crank it, you'll actually see it lifts the top of her forehead up. If you need to press it down, you actually can go in a negative direction. If you take her chin, you can actually lift her chin up higher or make it down lower. You can also change her jawline. This will actually make her jaw wider at the bottom, more square-faced, or more oval if you drag it in the other direction. And then finally, her face width. You can make the entire thing wider or the entire thing smaller. Again, your preview check mark on this all will work. And you can also go back and use any of your other tools. So you can click on the forward warp tool and say, oh, well, I really don't like the way what it did to her mouth over here. So I'm going to lift this whole part up and make it even worse. Questions about this? Are we good on this part? Okay. I'm going to cancel out of that. I'm going to close this up. The last thing I want to do is actually look at your homework file and what I'm asking you to do. So if you actually click on the assignment folder and double click on this, again, it's a copyrighted file by this photographer whose name I would never be able to pronounce even if we just met. So what I'm asking you to do with this figure, again, if you take a look at the assignment here, this is the list of everything I'm going to ask you to do to this image. So let me get rid of all of this so you can see the image. Well, I'm just going to read it to you off of my list right here. So what I'm asking you to do with this image is to narrow down her thighs slightly, to thin her arms slightly, contract her stomach, lift her shoulders, make her boobs a little bit smaller and lift them up, narrow her ankles, narrow her shins, thin these guys out, rotate her head so that it is straight up and down, thin out her face slightly. And then again, in the assignment, it's going to say to you, save the mesh and turn that in with your assignment. You do not need to save the mesh for this. We will talk next week about what meshes are. Are there any questions about this? So again, I'm just going to reiterate this one more time. If you are uncomfortable with doing this, please don't do it. Just let me know. You won't get a penalty hit for this. If you're just lazy and you want to get out of the assignment, fuck you. Then you're just lazy.
That's on video.
That's totally on video. Yeah. Did I ever tell you guys I used to back in the day I would refuse to let anybody record my classes because as you guys know, my language can get colorful. That's the way I like to phrase it. But now I record them myself and post them. And it's like, what am I thinking? Okay, one last thing I will say. There is, I think, the meeting today between fashion and photography is happening downstairs. Is that today? It is today, right? And it's downstairs. So just if you don't know about it, the Career Center has put together a meeting. There's going to be something of a panel discussion, I think. But the best thing about this, so panel discussion about work and when you're leaving here and all that, it's a collaboration between fashion students and photography. So those two groups are going to be there. But it's a great networking opportunity. So even if you don't care about the panel discussion part, if you're doing anything remotely related to this, it's a good opportunity. And I just want to make sure everybody was aware of it, and you should probably take advantage of it. Are there questions about any of this stuff? Perfect. Do me a favor, send me whatever you have about that, and I will send it to all my classes as well. Okay? All right. Hang on one second. Let me stop the recording now that I've just done all of that.